What's up guys, Doug Polk here, and we're back for another episode of Poker Hands, and today we're going to be taking a look at a hand from Poker After Dark between Tom Dwan and Phil Ivey.
Biggest the bet.
Has to be a big bet, obviously.
2,500.
I'll free roll. 50,000.
We bet big enough, I'll quit right now, in the middle of this hand.
Exactly.
You guys got 50,000 each to quit.
Exactly.
Games are good. I would like that.
I'll retire for 4 minutes.
What happened? Take some chips here?
Well, you only need 3.95.
Our hand begins at $400, $800 blinds, with Tom Dwan making a standard raise in the hijack with Queen 10 suited. Now over to David Peat in the cutoff, and he has a clear as day 3-bet with Ace King, so he decides to flat. The button folds, the small blind folds, and the action is over to Phil Ivey with pocket fours. Now when you have low pairs in the big blind, you should just call and take a flop. They have bad removal for 3-betting. Just call, take a flop, and I don't know, maybe you'll flop a set.
Dwan, the pre-flop raiser in a three-way pot, and he flops top pair while Ivey's got a set.
Saying you only need
He doesn't.
3.95. I'm giving you
He
50
doesn't.
of it.
5,000.
Phil leads right out. That'll help disguise his hand. Obviously taking the chance that he has two folds behind him and doesn't win any more money. But it's one Phil was willing to take, and he's got it down to heads up with himself and Dwan.
Anyway, the flop does come 10-5-4, and Phil Ivey flops a set. Now, he decides to lead out here, and you know what? You can have a leading strategy. If you're going to, you have to balance it out with some flush draws, some straight draws, maybe a couple backdoor flush draws or overcards types of hands. But in general, I would advise you guys to not do this. The problem is that it's hard to balance, and then if you're going to lead a bunch of your good hands, what does it mean when you check? If I'm Tom Dwan and I see this hand eventually show down, what I'm thinking to myself is, when I have an overpair and Ivey checks in this spot in the future, it means he does not have a hand like a set very often, so I can value bet more fearlessly with my top pairs. Anyway, Ivey decides to fire 5,000, and the action's on Tom Dwan. Now, I think with top pair here, you're going to have to call. You obviously aren't going to fold, and at the same time, raising would make the pot too big for the strength of your hand, so it's a pretty good spot to play some pot control, call, and see a turn. After Tom calls, it's over to David Peat with Ace King that's totally whiffed. And look, man, you kind of did this to yourself. Although I'll give this up. You lost less money because if you had 3-bet, Tom would have flatted and flopped top pair and wouldn't have gone anywhere. But should still learn from this. 3-bet your Ace King, isolate your opponents, and like to win as much money as you can when you have Ace King.
And there's a trouble card for Tom. It does put a third spade on the board, however.
What do you mean? You might need to see a doctor.
15.
15,000.
Phil's not worried about a flush and bets 15,000.
He folds the king jack. It's the only card I was thinking about. Kept firing until I got there.
Dwan calls.
Gonna be jack of hearts.
Almost 50K pot.
The turn comes the Queen of Spades, which Phil Ivey cannot be happy about. Now if Tom had a flush draw, he's turned to flush, and if he had a hand like queens, he's improved the top set. Also, if Tom has a hand like aces or kings with a spade, well now he has a lot more equity against a hand like a set, so Ivey cannot be pumped. He does decide to fire out 15,000, and I like this play. In general, when you have a set on these types of boards, you want to keep betting because if you do decide to check, then a spade can roll off, and all of a sudden you have a set and a 4 flush board. And you know what? That actually is really familiar. We just did a poker hands where that happened. Like Friday. We just did this. Now over to Tom Dwan with top 2, and he has a pretty clear call. Yeah, he could be ahead of a few hands like worst 2 pairs, or maybe a straight draw that's continuing to bluff on the turn, but he's toast against a set or a flush unless he boats on the river. So in this situation, you kind of want to call and keep it in front of you, and that's one of the advantages of being in position. You get to play rivers very efficiently. If he gets a bad river like a spade, he can let it go. If he gets a good river like, you know, some kind of brick, he can continue, and he gets to really maximize the value of his hand by being in position. Anyway, he does decide to go ahead and call, and let's take a river.
Ace on the end changes nothing. Now Ivey bets 80% of the pot.
40,000.
The river comes an offsuit ace, and Ivey fires out an over 80% pot bet. I'm a little surprised to see Ivey not be at least a little bit afraid of a hand like a flush or a set, but maybe he just really believes those hands would have raised an earlier street. Tom Dwan could also have a hand like aces, or maybe a hand like king jack with a spade. That would be a somewhat reasonable hand to have here too. But in general, he perhaps just thinks that Tom Dwan has one or two pair, and his set's just good. This is one of those spots I think Phil Ivey is exceptionally good at. He knows when to pounce for value, and is not afraid of the fact that the board has some completed draws at all. Now over to Tom Dwan, and Tom's got an honestly pretty tough decision. He's going to have a bunch of one pair hands like 10x to 10 with a spade, maybe a couple hands like king, queen, or queen, jack that float the flop of clubs. You can maybe have a couple of aces, a hand like ace, king, or ace, jack with the ace of spades could be some hands too. So he has a hand that's certainly stronger than a lot of his other holdings. The problem is, what hands can Ivey be bluffing? And realistically, the only way Ivey's bluffing is if he had a hand on the flop like 6-7, 8-6, 7-6, maybe 6 deuce, although does that really flat pre-flop, and decided to lead 3 streets representing a flush. Now, I'm not ruling that out, and we definitely want to play within our range, but it is important to note that Tom can have some better hands. He can have hands like ace 10, or king jack with a spade, or some flushes, or maybe some sets. This kind of puts us in no man's land here with queen 10. I don't really mind going either way. I think this is a spot where when you have a hand that's this close between both decisions, you might want to lean towards what you think about your opponent, how capable that you think that they are, and do they make a lot of moves. Now, you might make the argument that queen 10 is simply a hand that's a little bit too strong to be able to fold, and I can get behind that too. So I think either calling here because it's too strong or making a read based on your opponent is the play.
Pretty tough spot to be in if you're Tom Dwan. Players often lead out with the draw. Dwan will call though. And Phil takes one back.
If you guys are interested in learning more about how to play when you're deep in a tournament and trying to make the final table, check out the link in the description below. And as always, thank you for joining me for Poker Hands.